Hey, everybody, and welcome to the show. This is Liz joining you as usual from Central Virginia and the unceded lands of the Monacan Nation. And I'm so glad that you are here with me today. As always, it's a new moon, and I'm bringing you another episode of the Interstitial, which is these episodes kind of in between recorded interviews that I've done. And today I want to talk to you about ways in which I think we are cutting ourselves off from our own power. Some of the most common ways that I feel like I have seen in others that I've worked with, but I only know it if it's in myself, right? So ways that I've seen myself do it too. So we'll talk about that, but before we get into that, I kind of have a big announcement. This is the last episode of the Home to Her podcast for the foreseeable future. I don't like to say never because who knows what the future holds. But what I will say is that this podcast is feeling complete for me. I've had it for 6 years now, started it right before the pandemic began, and who knew, how fortuitous that would be, that timing. It's been an incredible experience. I've met so many amazing people that I've had on this show, many of whom have become my friends. Just, and part of doing the podcast is I wanted those relationships. I didn't want to explore this on my own. And so there's this kind of a selfish thing. Like, I wonder if people listen if I go out and talk to other people who are exploring sacred feminine wisdom. And lo and behold, you did. And I'm so glad you've all been along for the ride. So it's been an incredible journey. I think that the most simple reason I can say for why I'm wrapping this up now is just it feels complete. The energy feels like it's wanting to move in a different direction. And part of my work with the feminine has been having the courage to listen and follow that energy and trust it, even when I don't know where I'm necessarily going. It's definitely not always easy. But I've had enough experience doing that at this point that I'm okay trusting it. So yeah, I have every intention of having all the past episodes out there in the world. So if you happen to be new here, you've got 6 years worth of back episodes that you can explore. And I'm still planning on continuing to do my coaching work. How do I continue to integrate it into my own life? And how do I help others that want help? How do I help them do that? So I'm still doing one-on-one coaching work. I still have a little thing in the back of my head around small group work, not exactly sure how that might shape up. And I'm still, have a little thing back here around retreats and doing retreats. And I'm just going to let that energy flow and show me where it wants to show up. But check out my website if you want to know what's going on. But let's get on. Let's get on with the topic of the day. So I want to talk about 5 specific ways that I think women, and I don't want to just say women, individuals, but because I identify as a woman and I have more often than not spoken with women, although not exclusively, but spoken with women and worked with women around this topic, like 5 ways that I think that we are cutting ourselves off from our own power. And I've even wrestled with this word power lately. Like, is that the right word? It's so hard when all of our language comes from within a patriarchal construct. And so words have connotations that the culture has overlaid on them. This is one of the reasons why I find it so hard to talk about the feminine, because there's so much baggage around the word itself that we didn't get to choose. We didn't get to choose any of the words that relate to a female feminine experience. So I kind of am feeling that way about power too. As I think we've got this idea of power is like, when I say that, I'm like, kind of, I don't know if you remember like the Wonder Woman poses that were popular a while back where, this is how you step into your power. You put your hands on your hips and you stand up tall. And, it's about projecting this larger aspect of self, or it's about dominance, it's about control. And none of that is really what I'm talking about with feminine power. And I think when you're fully in it, whatever it is, it actually can kind of look the opposite, which is why it's a little bit deceiving. There's a beautiful groundedness. There's a beautiful solidness and peace, but it might not look like how we've imagined power in the past. And we'll come back to that. But so let's talk about this. 5 ways that I think women in particular might be undercutting our power. And the first one is related to, when I talk about these 6 aspects of feminine power, there's an ebook on my website that you can download and learn more about that. And I've been referring to these things within these interstitial episodes too. The first one I talk about is the power to affirm and celebrate life. There's a lot of different ways that we can unpack each of these forms of power, but one of the ways that I think is a real tell around this power of affirming and celebrating life is how we treat our deepest desires. Do we follow them or do we reject them? And I write about this in my book, Home to Her, about how desire has gotten kind of a bad rap. And I talked about it from a Christian perspective. But I think even from an Eastern philosophical perspective, this idea that desire leads to suffering and should be rejected is common. And the closest thing that I can think of to what I'm talking about is I've seen in more like a classical tantra sense, which is that desire is instructive. Desire tells us where we want to go. It doesn't mean that that's where we're going to end up, but we respect it and we follow it because that's a soul growth path in a different way. One soul growth path might be, let me just get rid of all of it. Another soul growth path is like, let me turn my attention towards this thing and see why it's calling me. And I think for women in particular, who've been indoctrinated in this idea that your wants and your desires are too much, a path that tells you to reject your desire is not going to be, for me, has not been as growth orienting. So rather than being something to reject, I think of desire, and I'm talking like those deep, deep desires, those like, oh my God, my soul aches for this thing. That is the essence of you and your soul and your deeper spiritual nature. And so to cut ourselves off from that, I think is a giant miss. And maybe it seems like, why would you do that? Why would you do that? Well, I think most of us, and I'm putting myself in this bucket, we choose to do this because we are afraid of disrupting our lives. And I'm going to get more granular than that and say we are afraid of losing the people that we love. We are afraid of rejection. Specifically, we could say family members, but I would say what I have heard and what I've experienced most often is loss of love from a significant other and a partner. I have changed, I have grown. For example, my person has not, or my person doesn't know what to do with this aspect of me, or I'm afraid that my person will say, wait, this is not the person I signed up to be with, and I'm going to be rejected, and I'm going to lose this relationship. And maybe it's even, oh, I'm afraid if I fully embody this, I won't have intimate relationship in general. That's some really powerful stuff that can keep us in a particular place. And what I can say about this, if we're going to talk about cutting ourselves off from our power, when we are shutting ourselves down around desire, and whether that story is true or not, that this person, people, whoever might reject us, whether it's true or not, if it's keeping us small, I can absolutely promise you that it is keeping you small in every other area of your life, especially if we're talking about the most significant relationship you might have, whether that's family or intimate partner. If you do not feel like you can fully express in the relationship that takes up, or the relationships that take up the most amount of your time, that is affecting every area of your life. And that's something that I really learned intimately when I got divorced. I had that feeling of like, wow, there's conflict here. There's inner conflict within me that's creating friction in a relationship that's been really important to me for a really long time. But I'm no longer the same, and I don't feel like I can continue showing up the same, and I don't know what to do with that. And so my solution, and I think I've seen a lot of women do this, for a time was like, let me just shut that down. Let me just make it a little bit smaller. Or let me tell myself it's not that important. Or, let me look around for evidence that says nobody else is doing this, so I shouldn't be doing this, whatever the case. And then that shrinking of self affects everything. It affects everything. And there's no way we can be our most powerful, authentic selves if we are showing up in our if we are showing up in our most important relationships as less than that. It just doesn't work. And here's where the rubber really meets the road, and where I'm sometimes like, I don't know if I'm not really a good salesperson for doing this kind of work necessarily, because I think there's a lot of focus on success in our culture, and I put success in air quotes, and like what it looks like to, like, oh, if you go after that thing and you get it, you're going to be so happy. And sometimes you are. And sometimes there are real and painful trade-offs. And, without going too much into my situation, I can say that I know this intimately, that choosing to access that deeper truth in that authentic place, choosing that expanded my life in ways that were so needed and refreshing. And also, my marriage ended. And also, that had a great impact on my children, and it had a great impact on families, and it had a great impact on that relationship with my former partner, who I never stopped loving. Sometimes when we need to shift, sometimes the people around us shift with us, and sometimes they can't because they're on a different trajectory, or they don't want to. And those trade-offs can be painful. So there's never any judgment, on whether or not we choose to do this. It's hard work. But if the goal is to live fully and authentically and choose to do that, then moving towards that desire with the understanding that it is just instructive. It is our soul's instructions for where we want to go next. It's not necessarily the happy ending. If we keep moving towards that, we're regaining access to power, and that's important. And so that is one area. That's probably one of the biggest areas that I see women cutting themselves off from themselves. And it is worth it to think it through from every angle. If you're contemplating really big change, how is this going to affect others? How's it going to affect me? You can't possibly know what the outcome is going to be. But, weighing the pros and cons. For example, if we use a marriage, for example, staying in it for the kids versus, but the kids see me at 50%. Is it more beneficial for them to see me at 100%? But now I have less money in there. Two homes they have to go to. These are all things that are worth considering. How does my change affect others? And can you hold it in a way where you're not rejecting your need to change itself? Like that's a trick, right? Can you do it without abandoning yourself? If there is legitimately an awareness that there's a desire you want to follow, but you can't at this moment. Is that can't real? And if it is real, how do you sort of hold yourself in that place without losing the dream and the desire itself? It's all really rich and interesting work, and it's challenging work. But that's the first way that I see women and others cutting ourselves off from our own power is denying that soul calling, denying that heart's desire because we're too afraid of it disrupting our lives and specifically disrupting things relationally. The second is just ignoring the wisdom of the body. And again, each of these we could unpack so much more, but I've worked with a good number of people who are very aware that the body does have wisdom. I think what's hard is we live in a culture that doesn't prioritize that. We live in a fairly heady culture, and a lot of us are actually really smart and our brains are excellent and can turn things over a million different ways, and that's really helpful. Using those skills is helpful. The language of the body, in my experience, is more subtle. It's a little bit quieter. And so we have to cultivate the space to hear it. We actually have to commit to listening. And we have to commit, maybe even before that, we have to commit to cultivating the space and the stillness so that we actually know how the body is speaking to us in the first place. And that requires a commitment of time and effort, and it requires practice. And I think it depends on who you are. Sometimes some people's bodies are just like fully alive and they're louder than for others. And so maybe it's less time and effort versus others, it feels like a more subtle language. And so there's a real practice of leaning in and listening. And then the next step is trusting it. And that's the other hard thing, because we also live in a culture that doesn't necessarily prioritize body ways of knowing. So we have to practice. We have to practice. We have to give space to it, and we have to practice listening to it. The third way is by denying the relevance and the importance and the information that our emotions carry. Gosh, I feel like so many women are averse to their own emotional bodies and experiences. And especially when it comes to anger, we just think we shouldn't have it. We think we should reject it. We think tears and grief are something that need to be compartmentalized. And from my experience, this is wisdom. This is gold in terms of our journey. Anger is especially constructive in telling us where boundaries might have been crossed, where we want to pause. Grief is incredibly instructive in telling us about right timing, I think, and allowing something to move through us in order so that something else can grow. And so I see a lot of women, and I've done it myself, trying to reject emotions, trying to say, oh, I don't need to feel that, or oh, it's bad. Gosh, I actually see this a lot from a spiritual perspective with women who are trying to meditate their way out of their big emotions. Sit still and just let it all go. And in my experience, it is far more effective to let that emotion move. And again, the trick is, how do I do that in a way that is not going to cause deep harm to people around me, but is actually going to move it? And there are techniques that work differently for some people than others, but it can be done. It can be done, and it's a really effective way to learn what matters, to learn what you want to take a stand on, and what you really need to process. So that's the third, denying emotions. The fourth is missing out on the wisdom of the natural world. And again, I think most of us have been raised, indoctrinated into just ignoring it. Like we treat nature as just an infinite resource for ourselves, which anybody who's paying attention to climate change and the environment in general would know that it's not sustainable and hasn't been for decades. But beyond that, there is wisdom in nature. And oftentimes trees, plants, animals, they're talking to us. They have information for us. They can be supportive to us in determining what's next best step. And this is another one that we have to give space to. We have to practice what works best for me to tune into this wisdom. Where am I able to do this most effectively? And then there's repetition. The more that I expose myself to this, then the more that I learn. And I'm realizing as I'm saying this that I'm not framing this as reciprocity. And I really do want to frame it as reciprocity. It's not just about taking from the natural world. We're already excellent at that. We do that. But in the paying attention, there's an opportunity for deeper relationship and there's an opportunity to express gratitude. And I think what can happen, what does happen, when we start to tune into the natural world and we hear her talking to us, we care more about her too. We want to support her. We want to say thank you. We want to be mindful of the choices that we make. I'm going to do a little side note here. A rant. I'm going to give a rant. I really do try, by the way, to understand where people are coming from. I try hard. I really do. And usually I'm decent at it, even if it's not my mindset, I can get to that place where I'm like, oh, okay, I understand how somebody could do this or that. But one of the things that drives me absolutely bananas is when I'm on airplanes and everybody has their shades down for the whole time. Like they're not even interested in what the world looks like from up in the sky. And I know people are frequent flyers. I usually take several plane trips a year. But how many handfuls of times do you actually get to see the world from that perspective? How many times? And what a beautiful and incredible gift to see her from that vantage point. And I'm just fascinated by the fact that most of the times, if I'm not on a window seat, like the entire row of plane windows is shut. And I'm oftentimes, if I am in the window seat, I'm the only one that's peeking out or trying to look or just taking a break, from the show or whatever you're doing to just witness. And I want to go back to how this relates to power. The thing is, because it also relates to the fifth aspect of how we're cutting ourselves off from our own power. The thing is, you're not in it alone. Like we've got a whole cultural idea of I got to do this all by myself. Or maybe at best, I'm working with a team of people, but it's me. I am the individual driver of all of this. It's false. It's a false narrative that we are not part of a much bigger ecosystem. But also, we're missing out on an opportunity to collaborate with the natural world. And especially if I'm talking about things like, let's say, following your heart's desire, and it's challenging. You're like, I don't know how I can do this. Well, then tapping into the natural world as support is so helpful. It can absolutely point you towards next steps where you need to go. It can absolutely help you feel less alone. It can absolutely give you signs and symbols of what needs to happen next. And this is related to the fifth aspect of how I think we're cutting ourselves off from our power, and that is trying to go it alone. And I do mean that, like we hold our thing in because we're afraid that it's too weird or it's too different or nobody's going to understand. Okay, I've done that. Maybe you don't, but I have. But we're also cutting ourselves off from our ancestors, from asking them for help, from asking the unseen realms for help. And oftentimes I think we're so rooted into our belief of science and data and that there's only these ways of knowing that we can dismiss all these other ways of knowing that actually many indigenous cultures have been in touch with for a long time. And I think, for me with my Western European roots, I think my ancestors knew this. So we're cutting ourselves off from all that wisdom that would make the journey so much easier. And it makes it so much easier to navigate uncertainty, which I feel like we are living in increasingly uncertain world. And so don't we want all the help that we can get figuring out how to do this? And the same thing goes with just reaching out to other people too. The thing is like, probably said this before here, but I was part of a meditation class a while back. And one of the teachers said, was we were kind of sharing what thoughts had come up, or during our meditations or whatever. And one of the teachers said, there's only so many thoughts that humans can have. Whatever you're thinking, somebody else has probably had it. And I think that's true of the range of human experience and emotions too. Like whatever you're experiencing is guaranteed that somebody else has had that experience. Somebody's felt it. Or somebody can relate, even if it's not exactly the same. And so when we hold this in ourselves, we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to connect with others who, just at a base level could support us in our challenges, but also could be like, hey, this worked for me. Maybe it will work for you. Or let me just hold you in this. So, I want to go back to this idea of power and maybe, I don't know if that's the right word. I don't know. But what I will say is that, if we're not cutting ourselves off from these aspects, we'll call them power, fine. But if we're not cutting ourselves off from these aspects of power and we're really letting them show up in our lives, then our lives can look really different. But the thing is, they might not look big and loud. They might not be you, I don't know, stomping into a boardroom and everybody turning to look at you. They might not be having a massive amount of social media followers. I think what it looks like instead is a deep comfort in the way you're living your life because you're not out of alignment. You're not performing. You're not pretending to be someone else. You don't have to. And there's a solidness and a groundedness and a deep gratitude and an ability to be present to the world around you when you live in that way. You get to orient towards joy, which is just amazing. And don't we all want that? That's what I've got for this episode, and that's what I've got for this Home to Her podcast, this incredible experience that I've been a part of for the last 6 years. And for all of you that have tuned in at some point and listened, please know how deeply grateful I am for you. I'm still out here, still doing my one-on-one work. We'll see how my social media presence continues or not. That's another one that I'm energetically really struggle with, the ability to, I don't know, there's something counter to the work of the feminine too. Something counter about needing to play an algorithm game and show up with consistency when those thoughts aren't always rolling consistently. That's felt counterintuitive to me. So we'll see about that. But in the meantime, I want to thank you so much for being on this journey with me. If you are interested in one-on-one work, you can absolutely reach out and do a discovery call. And please know that I am wishing you so many good things on your own journey, home to her, home to yourself, whatever that looks like for you. And may it be blessed. Thank you. Thank you.